many of them people who had had somebody killed in Oklahoma City. And all of the quotes were pretty much the same. You know, I don't feel any better. And the banner headlines that day were, "It still hurts." And I'm sure that it does. There is no such thing as closure on something like that. And I'm convinced that what victims need far more than vengeance is to hear a person say, "I'm sorry." And if we execute somebody before he has the chance to come to that point where he says, "I'm sorry," then the victims are deprived of that. So I think that execution is, it destroys the opportunity for victims to come to some sense of fulfillment. I struggled with my anger until I heard Mike, the person who killed my son Scott, say that he was sorry. And that touched me. I had been praying to God and asking, how do I unload the anger that I have? And God seemed to be saying to me, wait. And I couldn't get any other answer. And then almost a year after Scott's death, we sat in court waiting for the sentencing of Mike, and the judge asked if he had anything to say. And he said, "I'm sorry I killed Scott Everett. I wish I could bring him back. Obviously I can't. This must sound like empty words, but I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry." And he sat down. And somebody sitting next to me said, "He didn't mean that. He was just trying to impress the judge." And I said, "I don't know that. I heard what he said." And I felt that was an answer to my prayers. And I went home and thought about it and felt I needed to respond to that. Didn't know how to respond to it. I knew I couldn't go visit him. I didn't want to. I still didn't like this guy. But I felt that maybe I could write him a letter. And I'm convinced now that forgiveness has a lot less to do with feeling good about the other person than it does with feeling good enough about yourself that you want to heal. And so it's not based on a feeling, it's an act of the will that ultimately leads to some healing on the part of the victim. I was angry at shoddy police work. I was angry at the death of my son. I was angry at so many other things for almost that year. And I would go to a survivors group and find that people 15 or 20 years after the death of a loved one were still saying things like, "I think anybody who ever kills anybody should be taken out and shot immediately, no questions asked." That kind of anger came from somebody whose son had been killed 14 years earlier. And I realized that my anger was destroying me, and I couldn't live like that. And that's when I began to pray to God and ask for a way out. Well, in the meantime, the state's attorney called me and said, "Come in, I want to talk to you about the case." And I went in to see him, and he said, "Well, we've come to a plea bargain with the person who killed your son." I said, "What are the terms?" He said, "Well, he was originally charged with homicide. We've reduced the charge to second-degree manslaughter. He'll plead guilty to that and get a sentence of 10 years, suspended after 5. And I was furious, and I said, 5 years for killing my son? And he said, "Well, I know you don't like it, but you don't have any say in the matter. The state is the injured party. The state prosecutes. You're just a bystander." And, to be told I was a bystander when it was my own son, that's one of the worst things that can happen. That's what is known as retributive justice. Doesn't care about the victim. I've become very much interested in a growing movement called Restorative Justice, in which the first question asked is, who has been injured? How do we bring healing to that person? Secondly, how do we encourage a sense of accountability on the part of the offender? And third, how do we restore trust to the community as a whole? And
So accountability is important for
yeah,
the offender.
absolutely. That's part of it. Forgiveness isn't just saying, well, it's okay. Forgiveness is saying it's not okay.
I think probably a lot of people make that mistake and think
Yeah.
capital punishment proponents are sort of saying that it's okay, or to let
It's
them,
okay, or let them all out. And
right.
that's not the case. But
But you also mentioned that life imprisonment is a death sentence as well.
yeah, some people push for life imprisonment rather than the death penalty, and I tend to believe that life imprisonment implies that a person is never going to change. And there are some people who probably, for the sake of society, should never be let out. But there are other people who change and can be productive members of society. And a person who has changed, who is either executed or is kept in prison for life, it's costing the state a tremendous amount of money when that person could be out producing and doing things for society. But I was angry at that plea bargain. And I was angry at all the other things along the way, but I was angry at the plea bargain. The state's attorney said, well, first of all, we don't have as good a case as we would like because the police didn't do the work that they should have. And secondly, he said, we want to make sure that this guy does some serious time. And we don't want him...
They said this to you.
The state's attorney.
The state's attorney did say that they wanted this man to do
some time.
To do some time. Okay.
But he said we don't want him getting off on a technicality.
Okay.
So I was furious at that, but I found out that the plea bargain was a gift, because if Mike had not agreed to a plea bargain, he would not have been able to stand in court and say, I'm sorry for what I did. If he was facing a jury, even if he was convicted, his attorney would say, don't say a thing, we're going to appeal it. And I would never have heard that. And I'm convinced that I'm sorry is what victims need to hear more than anything else.